I've been tracking my word counts and my projects for the past 5 years. Let's take a look at those numbers. Hey there, Dragonlings! Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Skye. I'm a fantasy author who typically writes paranormal romance under the name SD Hegyes, and today we're going to be looking at my word counts and projects for the past 5 years, from 2020 to 2024. Now, these numbers might not be 100% accurate because I did not make the spreadsheet we're going to be looking at until like 2023, late 2023 at that. And so all of the numbers that I have listed on here from 2020 to 2023 are taken from paper documentation that I had been keeping, but it's very possible I either missed some documentation or had some documentation that never made it into the computer that I will find at a later date when I am cleaning up paperwork again, whenever that happens. But at this moment, this is as accurate as I can get it with the documentation that I was able to find so far. And I think it's accurate enough for the purposes of this video. So let's go ahead and go take a look at those numbers. I'm going to do a screen share. I'm going to show you what I'm looking at and kind of explain and go over everything that I worked on and the word counts I was hitting and some of the reasons why I think different things happened. If you're interested in following along for the next 5 years, from 2025 to 2029, and seeing what kind of number of word counts I get for that set of years, feel free to subscribe to this channel because in another 5 years, I plan on doing another one of these videos, and at least that information will be more accurate. So let's buckle up and go take a look at these numbers. Okay, so here we are at my computer screen, and I'm sorry for the outfit change, but I've had to re-record this a couple different times because of audio issues, and I'm trying different things to fix that problem. So if you hear any noise in the background, that is my computer. It is very loud and obnoxious. I'm sorry about that. There's nothing I can do about it. Her fan is very loud. She is a loud beastie. Okay, so we are here looking at my 2020 to 2024 word and project tracker. A few caveats to this tracker. The first of that, this is as accurate of information as I can get at this time. I think I created this tracker either in late 2022 or late 2023. I know it was one of those 2 years. I'm just not certain which one. And I know it was near the tail end of whichever year it was. So before that, all of my documentation was in written form on paper or looking at Scrivener files or stuff like that. So I've had to compile this information from a few different sources. It wasn't that I have been tracking it this way this entire time. So that is the first caveat. And the fact that because of all that, there might be stuff missing, there might be information missing, there might be information that never made it into this tracker because I either haven't found it or because of the fact that those files are gone, so I don't have any record of them, or something to that effect. The second caveat is that when we're looking at this project tracker, the way I have them titled as far as like project 1, project 2, is not necessarily the order in which I worked on them. This doesn't necessarily affect the word counts, but like you might go back and watch some of my earlier videos and see me talking about specific projects, and the way they're listed in this tracker isn't the order in which I talked about them in those videos. So those are the two caveats that I wanted to come up with, and if I think of anything else, I will add them in as I go. But let's go ahead and take a look at this tracker. I have several tabs on this tracker. The first of which we're actually going to be looking at is the 2020 page. I have each year as its own individual tab. Then I have a page where I've got a collection of annual stats that I wanted to keep like a quick glance for. I also have a page where I started tracking writing challenges in 2024. So that was a new addition that I added in that year. And then at the end of 2024, because of everything going on with the NaNo organization and the scandals that they've been in the past few years, I decided to pull away from the NaNo organization and the NaNo event, and I decided I wanted to delete my account with NaNoWriMo. But before I deleted my account, I wanted to make sure I had all that information from the website because that was a lot of writing information. Have I gone back through all that information and subjected that into these word trackers in their individual years? I have not. And part of the reason for that is because of the fact that, especially later on in NaNoWriMo years, I was working on multiple different projects at the same time during different events, and I don't know what numbers go to which projects. So those might, if you like take a closer look and start like comparing and contrasting, those stats might not equate to the same stats you see on my tracker. The other thing is the fact that some of the projects probably did not get listed because they weren't projects that were going anywhere, like they were just for funsies, or like I was just trying to get words out of my head and I was just brainstorming some things, and I didn't always track those words. So with those caveats out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at this tracker. So we're going to start with 2020, then we're going to look at each year individually before we go to the annual stats, and then the writing challenges, and finally the nano stats, which I will not be going over in great detail. I'll just be showing you what information I pulled and set up in this tracker. The first thing I want to talk about with these individual yearly trackers is the fact that I have at the very top, the first line is the number which project it was. And again, these are not necessarily the order I wrote them in, they were just the order in which I added them to this tracker. The second line is the project title, whatever I was calling it at the time, whether it was titled or not. The next line is whether or not I finished the project. The next line is any notes I had about the project. This was something because, again, I didn't create this tracker until either 2022 or 2023. I don't have a lot of notes for those earlier years. The next line on the left-hand column is the total annual word count, but I've also got the individual total word count for each project as well. Then below that, I have this numbered from the 1st of January all the way to the end of December 31st. And then there's these individual lines that mark the end of each month with the monthly total word count as well as the project total word count. So, and then I inputted my numbers as far as like what I wrote into each individual day and the projects that I was working on. So, going back up to the top, our first project was Damned and Desolate. This is the first book in the Damned and Dangerous Quartet, which is currently published. I did finish that draft in 2020 with 59,333 words. The second project was Damned and Dangerous, which I also completed with 66,208 words, and that one is also now currently published. Any books that are published, you'll find links for them in the description. Some of the anthologies are no longer published. Either they were under contract for some number of years and they are no longer available, or they were like low, short-run anthologies, meaning they were only published for a few months at a time before they were pulled. So, final caveat for now, I think. The next project I worked on was Dear Satan, which I finished. This is actually the start of, for me personally, the 7-day book challenge projects. Because while the 7-day book challenge as we know it is based off another criteria, this was actually the start of it for me personally. And you will find a link to that video in the description below if you're interested in checking more about the history as far as the 7-day book challenge goes. But Dear Satan was my challenge for that. I did finish that one as well with 19,821 words. Following that, I had the second book in that particular series, which I did finish the first draft of. It's called Night Rider, and I wrote 31,386 words on that particular project. That project has gone through several name changes. It's still probably going to go through several more before I finally settle on a name because I'm changing a few things about that series, but that is what I was calling it at this particular time. I kept any titled names the same through the year as far as like whatever I was calling them at that time. So I will come back to Night Rider and it might have a different title in the future. Just saying. The next project I worked on was a collection of short stories called Fur, Teeth, and Claws. This is a collection of wolf-related and werewolf-related short stories that I wrote well before this year. I think the last one I actually wrote that I'm pulling into this collection was written in like 2010, maybe, or maybe later than that, but roughly. And I'm basically just going through editing, rewriting anything that needs to be tightened up, and putting that together. At the end of 2020, though, I had 15,093 words with that. The next project was for an anthology. It was a anthology submission for the Hope Unbound anthology, and that story was called The Name Sally. I did finish it with 6,885 words. That anthology never came to be, but I still have that story. The next project I wrote for the next 7-day book challenge that I tried to do, and that book is called Slayer. I did not complete it. It was supposed to be a short story, and it was 7,002 words that I wrote before I realized that the story was there was too much that needed to be written into the story for it to be a short story. It has since become a novel. In fact, actually, the name is now Blood Like Stained Glass instead of Slayer, and it is the story that if you sign up for my newsletter, you can get access to, because every month that I'm sending a newsletter, you get a new chapter of the story. I think my newsletter subscribers have gotten up to chapter 8, and I am currently writing chapter 9 of 22. Eventually I will finish that and start sending it back out to newsletter subscribers, but you can still get caught up on that if you are interested in reading that. The next project was for a pen name. That pen name has since changed. This particular story has been scrapped, but I did write 10,352 words on it before I DNF'd it. It does not say DNF here. It was a lot later that I decided to DNF it, like years. So, the next project I worked on was the first draft for another anthology called the Quarantined With Anthology. It was also another anthology that never came to be, but my particular story was Quarantined With a Dragon. I did complete this draft with 11,004 words. Then the next two projects were drafts 2 and 3 of the same project. We were supposed to have it under a specific word count, and I was trying to get there, and I was reworking different things. I did complete both those drafts. The draft 2 was 8,560 words, whereas draft 3 was 8,463 words. Following that, I worked on the second draft of Damned and Dangerous. This was also completed with 49,130 words. Following that, I have a project I just titled Project 13. To this day, I have no idea what project this was. I don't have access to it anymore. I don't know anything about it other than it was called Project 13 at the time. I did not complete it, obviously, and I wrote 3,610 words on whatever it was. The next project I worked on was also for that Quarantine With anthology. Basically what happened is I wrote the first story, got an idea for a different story completely, and that was the story I ended up submitting to that anthology. Again, that anthology never came to be. And then this story is now my current newsletter magnet. So if you sign up for my newsletter, you get a free copy of this story. It's called Cowboys and Dragons. I did finish that draft with 9,145 words. Following that, I wrote the second draft for Dear Satan, and I did complete it with 23,391 words. The next project was the second draft of Night Rider, which is the sequel to Dear Satan. I did not complete it though. I only wrote 3,316 words. Following that, I wrote 3 stories in the same series. The first of which I wrote was called One Spell. I did complete that draft with 47,772 words. I started on the sequel to Fangs. I only got 16,642 words into it before I realized that I needed to write a prequel to the series, which I started and called Zero Bites. I got 3,732 words into it before I just decided that I was not interested in writing that story currently. The next project I worked on was called Warlocks. This is a fun project that I work on here and there throughout the years, but I started writing in 2020, and I wrote 19,756 words. The final project that I worked on in the year of 2020 is called Raven's Call. It was supposed to be a 7-day book challenge. I started writing it, decided I didn't like the premise, and just quit writing it completely. And I got 1,410 words into it before I decided to DNF it. The final project I have listed here, I did not end up actually working on in 2020, and that is the second draft of the Quarantine With anthology submission, Cowboys and Dragons. I ended up putting this off till the next year because of the fact that right around the same time that I added it to this chart I had some notes with it that are not listed on here, in the fact that I got emails about the fact that the Quarantine with anthology was not happening, so I was still trying to decide what I was going to do with this story. I didn't know if it was going to be a reader magnet, if I was just going to set it aside for the time being, or what I was going to do with it. So I did add it onto this chart because I had notes about it, but I didn't end up working on it, as far as I know, in 2020. I didn't work on it until 2021. Again, if I find other notes that say otherwise, I'll add those in, but for now, as it stands, Raven's Call was my last project that I worked on in 2020. Skipping on over to 2021, I worked on 18 projects that year. The first of which was Warlocks. Again, that was a fun project. I just work on it here and there. I'm writing it out of order. I don't know what it's going to be, whether it's going to be one story, multiple stories, a serial. I don't know what I'm doing with that project. It's just existing at the moment with various words. It's a fanfic of a fanfic. I have an entire series of videos where I go over different projects, and Warlocks is one of them that I talked about in that video, and I will have a link to that series in the description if you're interested in checking that out, because I go into a lot of these projects in more detail in that series of videos. But suffice it to say, I did not complete it because I don't know what the heck I'm doing with it in the first place, but I did get 15,122 words written in 2021 with that project. The next one I worked on, it's still listed as a QWA project because I just pulled it from the other, the title from the other chart in 2020, and that's the Quarantine with a Cowboy. It should say Quarantine with a Dragon. Let me fix that real quick. Okay. So it was supposed to be Quarantine with a Dragon, not a cowboy, and that was for the QWA. It was writing a brand new draft of that very first story I wrote for the QWA, not the second one, and I got 12,096 words in that. The next project I worked on, it was the first project I actually completed. It was called A Meeting of Souls. This was for the AuthorTube anthology. I will have a link below if you're interested in checking that out. And I wrote 990 words for that project, and it is completed. The next project I worked on, this was originally called Night Rider, which was the second story in the Fire and Brimstone series. This was the first title change where I called it Demon Rider, and I wrote 14,215 words on it. The next project I worked on was for a contest, a writing contest, where we had a one-word theme, and we had to write a 300-word flash fiction for the contest, and those who were the top winners of the contest were put in an anthology. I submitted a story. I did complete it. It was for the QSS Flash Fiction contest. I wrote it. It was exactly 300 words, and that was after I trimmed it down to 300 words. And I did submit it. It did not make it into the contest. It did not make it into the anthology, but I'm still pretty proud of that story. The next two projects I worked on were for a simultaneous submission, anthology submission. What it was is that the creator of the two anthologies was putting out one urban fantasy, one paranormal romance. I thought we could only submit to one, and originally I was going to submit to the urban fantasy one. I did end up DNFing that project with only 503 words, and instead trying to work on the paranormal romance story, which I did complete with 7,764 words. That was one of the anthologies that ran for a short exclusive run. It ran for like 3 months, and then it was unpublished, and I am currently taking that story as of today in 2025. I am currently taking that story, increasing some of it a little bit, like building up the world a little bit more, adding some 2 extra chapters with a different character, and I will be producing that sometime in the near future-ish with along with other stories following the sisters of the main character in that story. If you've heard me talk about it, that is my Sultry Solstices short story series, and I have a lot of work to do with it, but it is slowly getting there, and this was its origin story, basically. The next project I worked on was called Phoenix of Blythewood. I did not complete it, and I got 4,835 words in it. The next project I worked on was a cowboy romance. It was going to be under a pen name, my Dakota Hoffman pen name. I did not complete it, but I wrote 6,962 words on it before I set it aside. The next project I worked on was the third book in the Damned and Dangerous Quartet called Damned and Deadly, and I wrote 28,733 words, but I didn't complete it. The next project I worked on was a collection of short stories where each story follows different characters. However, there is a cameo appearance of a character in each of the stories until that particular character gets their own story in the final story of the collection. How many times can I say story in the same sentence? Anyways, I did not complete this project. I did, however, get 34,296 words written on it. The next project I worked on was a standalone called Biting Rage. I did not complete it, but I did get 17,116 words. The next project I worked on was also another standalone. I did not complete it. It was called Just One Bite, and it was 23,320 words. The next project I worked on was for a client. It was a contracted story, and I did not complete it, but I did write 2,086 words. And after that, I was basically just futzing around with different projects, did not know what I wanted to write, wasn't really dedicated to anything, I was just writing willy-nilly. One of those projects was Unlucky in Magic, which I did not complete. I wrote 126 words in it. The next one was Tangled Fate, which I wrote 1,981 words for. The next one was Wolf Huntress, which I only wrote 261 words for. And the final project of 2020 was Packless, which I wrote 2,604 words. None of which I completed. None of those 4 projects I completed. Moving on to the year of 2022, I actually only have information for 12 different projects. I am pretty certain I worked on more. I definitely worked on projects where I started them and did not complete them, but I don't have any information on those particular projects. So, looking at these projects, this is the first time I actually have notes on any of the projects that I worked on, which is why I think I made this chart this year. Either that, I just kept better records for as far as like why I didn't complete different projects or where I stood with different projects, or it was fresh enough in my mind that I could remember what was going on with each of these projects. So the first project was that standalone that I started the year before. It's called Just One Bite. I did not finish it because I kept starting over. I wrote 43,354 words in it though. The next project was Warlocks. Again, did not finish it because it's a fun project, and I wrote 8,114 words. The next project was an untitled Fae Siren story, which I did not complete. I just wanted the idea out of my head, and I wrote 10,510 words on that particular story. Next, I wrote Demon Rider. I did finish this draft. I finished a rewrite, and it needs a lot of edits, but I did complete it with 30,640 words. The next project was Damned and Deadly. That's the 3rd book in the Damned and Dangerous Quartet. I did finish the rewrite, but it still needs a lot of edits, and I wrote 62,540 words. The next project I wrote was called Monster Inside. I stopped writing because I didn't know the ending or how it was supposed to end, and it was 15,885 words at the time. The next project is listed as unknown. This was random words I have no notes about. I feel like there's information. Oh, and no titles. I did have more information in these note sections. Okay, but I did write 4,676 words on that particular project. The next project was called Warlock for Consult. It's actually in the same world as Warlocks, but I was writing this one for an anthology submission. However, upon looking at their contract, I decided not to submit it. I did, however, finish the draft with 18,078 words. The next project I worked on was called Project Number 6, which it was a project I had for a pen name called for Isabel Hawk. I did not finish it. I started rewriting it under a new title, but I did get 16,199 words in that story before I stopped working on it. The next project I worked on was called Magic in His Touch. I did complete the first draft, however, it's terrible. I hate it, wanted to burn it with fire, but I wrote 29,712 words in it. The next project I worked on was called Snow Kisses. I did not complete it because I started rewriting it under a new title. I did write 2,865 words on it before I switched it up. The final project I wrote in 2022 was called Surrendering to His Touch. I did not complete it. It needs a rewrite of a few signs. Wow. I need to rewrite a few scenes and change some things, but I did write 20,329 words on this project before I set it aside for the year. Moving on to 2023. The first project I worked on, in 2023, I worked on 13 projects, and the first of which was a client project, number 1. I kept starting over. I got 1,650 words. As far as like the client projects go, it says client project 1, 2, and 3. This is draft 1, 2, and 3. So project number 2 was the second draft of that same story, and I started over, but I did get 9,490 words into it before I switched to project number 3, or draft number 3, which again started over, got to 15,736. Basically what was happening with that is that I would submit pieces of it to the client, and the client kept making changes. They were never satisfied with what I was submitting to them. I had originally submitted an outline to them. They were satisfied with that outline, but as I was actually drafting it and I was sending it to them, they were making changes to the outline. So that's fun, and we're not going to get into that. The next project I worked on, I also did not complete because I kept starting over. I don't know what project this was. It just says project number 5 for 2023. I couldn't tell you. I started over on it. I wrote 30,816 words on it before I DNF'd it. So the 2023 anthology submission, I DNF'd because I started over. I didn't like the original idea. I wrote 8,878 words before I changed the title. And I wrote Monster's Treasure. I wrote, edited, this one did get completed. I don't know why this doesn't say yes. It did get written, edited, and published to the anthology. It was in the anthology called To Love a Monster. Again, that contract has ended, and I'm taking that story and editing it and publishing it, and it will be one of 7 in its new format. But at the time, it was 14,194 words. The next project I worked on was called Best Friends Don't Kiss. I did DNF it. This was for the client. That same client, we finally settled on a title for that project, and when we settled on a title on it, I actually canceled that client contract due to the fact of them continuing to change the outline that we actually agreed on. So because they kept changing their mind about things, I was like, I guess that we're not a good fit for each other, and I canceled that contract. But I did write 21,021 words into that project before I DNF'd it completely and canceled the client contract. The next project I worked on was Hunter's Betrayal. This is the 3rd story in the Shifters and Mages series, and I wrote 19,394 words before I stopped working on it for that year. The next was called The Familiar Story. This was going to be an anthology submission, however I decided not to submit. I cannot remember the reasons why I decided not to submit, but before I DNF'd that project, I wrote 792 words. The next project I worked on was called A Dragon and a Man to Go With. This was actually, if we return back to 2020, 2021, the project that I was originally going to do for the Quarantine With anthology that I just called Quarantine with a Dragon. It finally got a title, and it was called A Dragon and a Man to Go With. I didn't finish it because I decided to focus on other projects, but before then I wrote 593 words in this new draft. Next, I started working on the writing prompt book that I will hopefully be returning to this year. I finished writing the prompts, but I'm still working out what I want to do with it next. But I did write 13,584 words in that project. The next project is called Jessie St. George, Teenage Dragon Slayer. This was the new title that I gave to Slayer back from 2020. And it has since gone through another title change because now it's called Blood Like Stained Glass. But at the time, I did not finish it. I said I was going to continue it next year with a chapter per month until complete. This was when I decided to add it to my newsletter subscribers list. And I wrote 31,048 words on that particular story before DNFing and trying to say I'll continue it in the next year. The last project I have listed is Story Ideas 2023. I was starting to keep track of what I was writing when I was just starting projects or trying to get words out of my heads or thoughts out of my heads or story ideas, plot bunnies out of my head. And I kept a single file for all of those. And it was basically snippets I couldn't get out of my head and had to write usually from dreams. And I wrote 33,780 words of those particular types of thoughts and stuff for the year of 2023. Moving on to 2024, I worked on 14 projects throughout the entire year. And this was where I really settled into what I was doing as far as how this chart was actually going to work. I made a lot of edits and changes to it this particular year, and I just added those features into the previous years to reflect those changes. But looking at this chart and looking at the fact that I've got 14 projects I worked on, in 2024, the first project I have listed is actually story ideas, because I wanted to make sure that was the first one listed, and that was just the story ideas I wrote throughout the entire year. And I wrote 66,718 words. The next project I worked on was the second story in the Sultry Solstices series. The Sultry Solstices was the one that was originally in the Summer Solstice Seduction, which had already been unpublished because it was on a 3-month contract. So it had actually been unpublished for almost 2 years at this point. But I started plotting out and writing the sequel books in that series. So with book number 2, I did finish it. It was my June 2024 7-day book challenge project, and I finished it with 10,425 words. Next, where I was writing down handwritten words, where it was various projects, but I was estimating the number of pages I was writing, or the number of words I was writing per page. And basically what I was doing is I was calculating how many pages I wrote, and then calculating word count from there. And I wrote 10,050 words handwritten throughout the year. Next was that Untitled Siren story. I decided to return back to it. I said this was going to join a new series, and it has an official title with it. But I wrote 2,064 words before I decided to stop working on it. Then I went back to the Solstice story, the first one, and I added a beginning and end chapter from the male love interest point of view, and I wrote 2,135 words. Next, I did my March 2024 7-day book challenge project, and I worked on Spell Gone Wrong. I did not complete it because it was supposed to be a novella and turned into a novel. Throughout my writing career, that has actually been a history for me, where something I thought was going to be a lot shorter turned into something a lot longer. So, that's fun. But I did write 28,319 words on that project before I stopped working on it. The next project I worked on was Shifters and Mages number 3. I did not get very far with this because I decided to return to working on Jenna's story before I complete this one, wrap things up with that. And I did end up editing it and taking out 38 words, so it says -38. The next project I worked on was the writing prompt book, which I officially gave a title called What's Your Story? And I was editing it, and I took out 13,507 words. The next project I worked on was also for the June 2024 7-day book challenge. It was originally supposed to be the third story in the Sultry Solstices series, but I changed my mind, and it actually became the first story in a new series called Captivating Cryptids. So there's going to be 2 series that are kind of interrelated. The characters are related to each other, and so yeah, looking forward to working on those stories. But the reason for the change was because this story was so much spicier. Like, the first 2 stories were super sweet, like sickly sweet, and this one was like spice. The series went from 0 to 60 in like one story. And that was part of the reason I decided to make it its own series and just change some of the characters out. So there is a new Sultry Solstices number 3, and this one is the first of 7 more stories, each featuring a different cryptid. So I did complete the first draft of it with 10,863 words though. And then I worked on the 4th story in the Sultry Solstices series, because the 3rd story did not become the first story in the new series until much later. But story number 4 I did not complete. It was also part of the June 2024 7-day book challenge. I completed 2 stories during that challenge, and I was halfway through this one with 6,932 words before the challenge finished, and I did not complete it the rest of the year. Next, I worked on random short stories, and they may or may not be published in the long run. I didn't particularly keep track of like what belonged to what short story. Not all of them were ever finished, but I wrote 83,009 words on those collection of short stories. Finally, I have Blood Like Stained Glass. This is when I finally gave it an official title, and I started editing it and started putting it together for the newsletter subscribers, and I edited it to the point where I took out 12 words but never wrote any new words. The next project I wrote on was Warlock for Consult. I was editing it at this point and rewriting it, and I did complete it for the anthology. This was when I decided not to submit it to that anthology. I think it was near the tail end of 2023 that it was for, and then I'm not quite certain of the timeline here. I think I was going to publish it as a standalone after the anthology, and I just put the fact that I didn't submit it to that anthology in this year. I don't remember exactly. But editing it, I actually just took away 2 words in the end. Then the final project I worked on in 2024, which I did not complete, was Damned and Dangerous Quartet Book Number 3, Damned and Deadly. I decided that there's a long vlog where I talked about this, but I had to read back through the second book so I could start writing Book 3. And due to that reread, I decided that I need to rework Books 1 and 2 before tackling this one again. And I was 6,753 words into this particular project before I DNF'd it completely. So those were the projects I worked on and the word counts I did in the 2020 through 2024. So let's go ahead and take a look at the annual stats. You'll notice I never mentioned annual numbers when talking about these projects because I wanted to take a look at the actual annual page. This page is set up with each of the months on the left-hand column from January to December, and then the years 2020 to 2024 at the top. And then the monthly totals are calculated in below that. This in 2024, I did add a planned what kind of word count I would like to hit, and in 2024, my goal was 517,500 words. I don't remember where that word count came from. I don't remember how it was calculated. Did I hit it? No, I did not. But previous years, I did not actually do that at all. And this line is my annual totals that I got for the year. So as you can see, in 2020, I wrote a total of 422,011 words. Again, that was the year of the pandemic. I was a stay-at-home mom. There was lots of factors that attributed to that being my highest word count across all 5 years. In 2021, that was the year we moved up here to Montana. I wrote 173,310 words. 2022, I wrote 262,902 words. In 2023, I wrote 200,976 words. And then in 2024, I wrote 217,587 words. So in 2020, with the pandemic, was the year I got the most words written. And then in 2021, because of my move up here and having to deal with that and finding jobs and stuff like that and getting the kids settled into school, that was the year I wrote the least amount with 173,310 words. Across all 5 years, I wrote a total of 1,276,786 words. That is a lot of words, and I'm hoping to get more than that in the next 5 years. But over here, I've got one final column. This is the average word count per year per month. So like my average word count for January across all 5 years was 13,026 words. My average word count for February was 18,500 words. For March, it was 23,298 words. April is 20,467. May, 11,080. June, 10,259. July, 21,032. August, 27,048. September, 37,397. October, 14,229. November, 43,586. And December, 15,436. With my total average being 255,357 words per year. So that is a look at the word count and project trackers and the annual stats that I got. Then, as I said, in 2024, I added this tab for writing challenges, and there was a few different writing challenges I tried. I was tracking different word counts for them, different things. The first of which was the 85K90, which takes place from January 1st to March 31st. The goal is to write 85,000 words. I wrote 80,436 words, so I had a negative 4,564 with a daily average of 893 words. I don't know why the .73 is there. Did I complete it? No, I did not. At the tail end of the year, Kate Kavanaugh did a 100K Q4 challenge where the goal was to write 100,000 words across all 3 months, October, November, December. And in October, I wrote 19,598 words. November, I wrote 46,770. And in December, I wrote 24,332. So I wrote a total of 90,700 words with negative 9,300 words before I hit the final goal. My daily average was 986 words. I did not complete the writing challenge. In February, I tried a new writing challenge where it was a good, better, best, where I was trying to hit specific word counts, and these were all highlighted whether or not I hit those specific word counts based on my good goal, my best goal, my good goal, better goal, best goal. And so I've got the different calculations there based on that, with this light green being meeting or succeeding my good goal, this light blue being whether or not I hit or exceeded my better goal, and then this darker purplish blue being whether or not I hit or exceeded my best goal. And then I've got my monthly total here and my daily average here. And then the final challenges I was tracking was the 7-day book projects that I completed in 2024. I never completely filled out this information, but I did have it calculating my word counts. I wrote a weekly total of 28,965 words for that first one. I wrote a total of 28,170 for the second one, and then I never completed the one for September. I'm not even certain when this first one took place because I never filled out the date. Whereas the second one took place 17 June through 23 June, and the final one took place 16 September through 22 September. I don't even remember what happened that I didn't write. I remember participating, but I didn't write. So that is a look at the writing challenges. The final tab I want to look at, we're not going to look at too closely. I just wanted to show you what information I was pulling from the NaNoWriMo website in case you have been trying to think about doing the same thing. And that is my NaNoWriMo stats. I started doing NaNoWriMo in 2009, so all of my stats are from both Nano and Camp Nano from 2009 till 2023, I think is the last time I participated. I'm not positive about that. So, first line is the title that I put on the website. Again, there was times where it says something like multiple projects. I don't remember what all I worked on, which is why these numbers might not be accurately reflected on the tabs that I have for the 5 years. Below that, I put the genre that I used on the website, and then which NaNo event it was for, the word count goal, the difference on whether or not I met that goal versus what I ended up writing, and then down here we've got the final goal per project, and then a total words written across all NaNo events. So I just participated in my first one in November 2009, my last one in November 2023, and the total number of words I wrote for NaNo events was 1,070,355 words. There we go. So I wrote a lot of words for NaNo across the years. So I'm really glad I have all these stats because otherwise I wouldn't have them. But I no longer have an account with NaNoWriMo. I no longer associate with NaNoWriMo. I will never participate in another NaNoWriMo event unless they make a lot of changes to the organization. We're not going to get into the details why. There's plenty of videos out there discussing what happened with NaNoWriMo in 2023 and 2024 that have cemented my decision not to participate in NaNoWriMo. So I'm not going to get into those details, but I did want the information from the site before I deleted my account. And now I have it, and it's forever immortalized in this particular tracker. The final thing I wanted to share with you on this video is I wanted to look at the 2025 to 2029 tracker and show you what changes I've made compared to the past and give you kind of like a sneak peek into what the next video like this, where I discuss the next 5 years, is going to look like, at least for now. Please note that throughout the years, if I think of other things that I want to change or I want to track, this may change a little bit, but for now, this is what it looks like. I've got us on a blank tab right now so you can see just without information what it looks like, and then I will show you what it looks like currently filled in. So as always, I have the project number at the top so I can track how many projects I'm going to be working on. I do have it estimated with, I think, 30 projects. 30 projects. I've never gotten to the point where I've written 30 projects. However, with the way I'm doing stories now, that may change. Or what I'm tracking now, that may change. In fact, actually, I might need to add more lines throughout the years, but we'll see. So, coming back to the beginning, this next line is where we put the title of the story, no matter what that title is. The next line is whether or not I finished that story, and I actually have changed it to a drop-down menu that says yes, no, did not finish, or will not finish, to be continued, which is more for like projects I started at the beginning of the year that I have plans to continue the next year, or NA. And when I show you the tab, you'll see what NA stuff is for. Well, it is not applicable for anyone curious. Next line is any notes that I wanted to put about the different stories, and I'm changing up how I'm doing those notes. Then, of course, the next line is split into two, the left side being the annual total across all projects, whereas this is the annual total per project. And then the next is the same as always. I've got it dated the January through December 31st of whatever year it falls into, and I can get to this part where I add in my daily word counts, and then this calculates the total daily word count. So some things have changed, but not a lot in a lot of ways. Clicking on my 2025 tab, you can see what it looks like when it's filled in a little bit. The first project I'm working on is anything dealing with brainstorming, which is why that's that non-applicable. And then any of my non-titled projects, I have them listed as Plot Bunny 2025, and then what number it is, and then in this particular case, like what draft it is. So the fact that this is idea number 4, draft 1, idea number 4, draft 2. And then in the notes, I'm actually got more detail about the project because I'm tired of looking back and not knowing what the project is. Or like I have, if I name said project, I have information about that. So it goes into a little bit more detail about the project, which means there's going to be a lot more notes. The next thing I have on the writing tracker is I still have my writing challenges, but I've changed up the look of them based on what I'm actually looking for. So the only ones I have on here currently are the 85K90, which I will continue participating in every year. And I have it set up so that it's already listed with the January through March, and it's got the different years through the whole tracker, and it's instantly pulling information from the individual tabs that correlate with those years. So like we just finished up the 85K90 for this particular year because today is the last day. It's the 31st when I'm recording this video. So I've actually written a total of 98,129 words, which means I have over the 85K by 13,129 words. And then of course I also have information on here about the 7-day book challenge, and I actually need to do this. I need to be continued. So because I worked on a book short in February when we did the 7K book, the 7-day book challenge, and then we just finished up yesterday the 7-day book challenge again, and this is that information. And again, it's pulling all this information directly from the tabs that they correlate with. So when I've decided the dates for the June 7-day book challenge and the September 7-day book challenge, I will add that information in here as well, so it automatically correlates the amount or numbers. Then finally we have our annual stats. Again, this page has changed a little bit because I'm tracking a couple different things, but I've got it set up for all 5 years, 2025 to 2029, all the months. It is calculating both annual word count and annual project count, so I can keep track of how many projects I work on per month, per year. And then down here we've got the annual word count goal, which I've just inputted. This I can change at any time. My goal this year is 400,000 words because I was calculating based on the fact that I would like to, I took inspiration from Kate Kavanaugh's 100K Q4 challenge, and I was like, I would like to complete 100K per quarter per year. So my word count goal is 400,000 words, with my annual word count goal being auto-calculated based on whatever I've written for the year. Then it's going to be the difference, like how much I have left to write or did not complete kind of thing, my monthly word count average, my daily word count average, and my annual project total. Then down here I have my total words for all 5 years. So far I have written 98,129 words for the entire year of 2025 to 2029. And then the total projects for 2025 to 2029 is currently at 11. And as these word count trackers at the top, the annual word count and the annual project count fill up, all of these information down here will change as well. So a bunch of things I've added or just changed up a little bit so that it's a little prettier. Would I like to do some other charts? Yes, I would actually love to have some pie charts that do some like calculations and show the different graphs of what this looks like in graph and chart form. I'm not good at making those, so I don't have them yet, if I ever will. The final tab I have added, I literally added like this past week, and that is a projects list. I mentioned earlier that I have a series of videos where I go into detail about the different series I'm writing under what pen names and stuff like that. This is a written form of that, basically, where I have this chart talking about like my interest levels, what projects, what series they go to, all of that information. This does include some of the short story series that I'm currently writing. However, any of the short stories that do not have designations as far as like what I'm going to be doing with them are not listed on here. I plan on making another chart that will look fairly similar to this for that. And that's to come. So keep an eye out for that video. But in this particular one, I am tracking my interest level, whether or not I have no interest in the project, a vague interest in the project. I could go either way depending on how I'm feeling when I am done with specific projects. I have a lot of interest in the project. I want to write it right now, or it's already published, or it's a continuation, meaning that I am got the interest level listed for, if it's part of a series, the previous book in the series. And this one, the next book, is a continuation. The next, I have status of the project, whether it is DNF'd, an idea, in progress, complete, or published. Finally, I have the title of the project. I've got this list in alphabetical order at the moment. What series it is part of, what number it is in that series, what word count. I literally just added this tab yesterday, and I have not filled it out. I will be filling this out in the future. What format it is, whether it is a short story, a novella, a novel, or NA. I don't remember. NA is going to be usually used when I don't know what the project's going to be, especially since a lot of times I will write it, think it's going to be a short story, and it turns into a novella, or a novella turns into a novel. So, what pen name it's under. Currently, I have several pen names for different genres. Fantasy is under SD Hegyes. Isabel Hawk is for the pen name that I'm using with a co-author. Coda Hegyes is my cozy paranormal mysteries. Skye D. Hegyes is my nonfiction. Dakota Hoffman is my contemporary romance that are on the sweeter sides. And then Regina Sykes is for anything that's supposed to be like erotica, very spicy. This is connected series. This was only used a couple of times if a series is part of like an interconnected world, and I wanted to be able to list what other series are connected to that book series I'm working with. The genre is next, whether it is urban fantasy, paranormal romance, fantasy, fantasy romance, paranormal cozy mystery, contemporary romance, nonfiction, or spicy. I have spicy as just spicy because most of my stuff is not spicy. Then I have, this is subjective, but I do have a tab where I'm like, what audience am I aiming for with this? This is, again, subjective, meaning it could change, but I have it as adult, new adult, young adult, middle grade, or children's. Then finally, I have publisher, and this is more because if I decide to go, most of my stuff will be published under my own imprint called Brimstone Books. However, if I do decide to go either hybrid or like I publish with a small press, whether it's for an anthology or anything like that, I do want to have those added in as well for different projects. So I have Brimstone Books as the only option currently, but I will be adding some more in the future if I ever do stuff like that. So I wanted to keep my options open. So that's what I've worked on for the past 5 years and the numbers I accomplished. If you like this video, feel free to hit that thumbs up button. Leave me either a numbers emoji or some kind of chart emoji to show that you made it to the end of the video. My question for you today is, how do you track your progress? And do you track across a single year, 5 years like I'm doing, or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments below, and in the meantime, my next video will be a March wrap-up. That's after my next weekly vlog. And until then, I hope you guys have a good day. Bye, Dragonlings.